Well, I guess we should say good afternoon to everyone. I'm Dr. Akilah Carter-Francique coming to you from San Jose State University in California. And I have joining me today.
Oh, sorry. I'm Sarah Dwyer-Shick. I'm with the Sports Bra Project and a youth soccer program in New York, about an hour or so north of Manhattan.
Great. I believe we've got a couple others that were slated to be with us today, and due to different circumstances in this Zoom space and interesting times that we have, they will not be able to join us today. So we will come to you and just share a little bit of our work, our background, and look forward to engaging in some great questions with you all today. So I guess with that, I'll go ahead and start us off, if that's okay, Sarah?
Sounds good.
Okay. Do a little share screen with everyone. Can you see that okay?
Looks good.
Great, great. Well, this is who I am, my information, and should you want to reach out to contact me via email, follow on social media, Twitter, or Instagram. I'm getting used to that space right now, so still a work in progress. But no, I'm coming to you again from San Jose State University, where I currently serve as the executive director for the Institute for the Study of Sport, Society, and Social Change. The Institute was launched in 2017 as a brainchild of Dr. Harry Edwards, and our goal with the Institute is really to promote and maintain the legacy of equity and social justice in sport. Again, our institute is really founded on the back of Dr. Edwards and his Olympic Project for Human Rights and the efforts and the courageous efforts of Tommie Smith and John Carlos. So please feel free to check us out and learn more about the Institute. In addition to serving as the executive director for the Institute, I'm also an associate professor in the Department of African American Studies, where I research and teach in that area. My main area of research is, examining issues of race, gender, and equity, in sport, in society. And so some of the research I'm going to share a little bit with you today, particularly as it pertains to girls and women in sport. That is one of my key focus areas. And so I wanted to talk to everyone a little bit about this notion of inclusive excellence. So is excellence inclusive? The significance of fostering a sense of belonging for women in sport. And so this first picture just kind of comes to mind because when I think about women in sport, I think about all the amazing organizations that I've had the opportunity to either interact with, support, or just, be able to kind of grow with when we talk about the legislation of Title IX, when we talk about leadership efforts of the Women's Sports Foundation, the NCAA Women's Leader in College Sport, or the Black Women in Sports Foundation, and the legacy of those scholars that write on and research about women in sport, to those athletes such as Venus and Serena Williams, but also their historic mothers. When we talk about Billie Jean King, when we talk about Naomi Attias, when we talk about just some amazing women, to include Patsy Mink, who Title IX, was named for. And again, some strong women that are on stage with me today that are doing some courageous things as we talk about women in sport and their involvement. And so I wanted to get into about three things today. One, what does it mean to be a woman, to be othered? So this particular piece of research came to me and really sort of thinking about this notion of women in sport and leadership. And so yesterday we had the great opportunity to have Dr. Richard Lapchick on keynote. And I pull a lot from his work from the Tides Institute. In particular, he talked about in one of his op-eds about that women were not really rising to the top still when we talk about leadership. But at that intersection was not only, racial minorities not in leadership roles, but also women not in leadership roles. And at the intersection was Black women. And so shortly after that, John Staley came out with the Players Tribune and talked about sort of where are all the Black coaches, in particular Black female coaches. So what does it mean to be a woman and also to be othered? Because race is involved in that, and when we think about those intersections as well. And so I took the opportunity because they said, hey, your best coaches are going to come from being participants in sport, right? So I wanted to look at college sport in particular and what that notion really looked like. And so I took a moment to pull numbers from the NCAA and the Tides Institute and look at where are women, in particular Black women, sort of factoring into these spaces. According to Dr. Lapchick and his colleagues, he said the NCAA had a C+ overall grade for race and gender equity, a B in racial hiring, and a C+ in gendered hiring. What that looks like on the right side of your screen is those particular percentages sort of falling out when we look at college head coaches in women's sports. And so we see that Black women are at 3.3%, white women 33.7%. And then if we go down, I mean, a drastic drop when we talk about Latina, Asian, Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, American Indian, Alaskan Native, two or more races, and non-resident alien and other. So stark differences when we talk about the NCAA in particular being able to fulfill this. I also talk about this notion of more than diversity, more than inclusion, this notion of inclusive excellence. It was quite interesting, and I have Mattel up here, yes, Barbie, and I know you're like, why is she up there? But even most recently, because of the confluence of COVID, but more specifically the racial unrest following the killing of George Floyd, we saw Barbie and Mattel came out and started to talk about this statement of solidarity, talk about what is racism, what is exclusion, what are privilege, what does that consist of? I also highlight them and really commend them for those statements, but also highlighting the fact that what they've done with their platform to really create an inclusive culture, not only in their statement, but in what they're doing as far as making dolls. And so a couple of weeks ago, I had the esteemed honor to interview Ibtihaj Muhammad. And in our interview, one of the things that she said was one of her greatest, accomplishments, not only medaling at the Olympics, but the opportunity to have her own Barbie, to see someone that looked like her. And so I really just want to kind of put that out there and to know that, again, representation definitely matters in all of that. So when we talk about inclusive excellence, particularly at the college level, it's an active process through which colleges and universities achieve excellence in learning, teaching, student development, institutional functioning, and engagement in local and global communities. More specifically, I look at inclusive excellence. And so I want you all to think about your own departments, your representative organizations. What statement do they have? What does their mission statement flesh out to be? The NCAA has an inclusion best practices, but what does that look like? Here it says a clear mission, well-resourced and connected, being involved, include evaluation and assessment, and become embedded in the systems. Now, again, we just looked at those statistics and saw that the numbers when we talk about inclusive excellence and representation do not align really with this inclusion best practices manual that they have. So it's one of those things that begin to challenge those respective organizations and the work that they do and what they speak about. I go into more depth in examining again the experience of Black women, Black female athletes. Again, this gateway to becoming a coach or becoming an administrator, if we look at white males in particular, is through this pathway of being an athlete and then moving on ahead and this mentorship that takes place. And so I talk often about Carla Williams, who's at the University of Virginia. And colleagues say she had a 20-year interview to become an AD, where we see some other individuals that just fast track into this space in like 4 to 5 years. She went through the gamut. She's got a doctorate as well. But what is it going to take to get our young women to the next level? Because not everyone is coming out with the accolades of a Dawn Staley, who still says she had challenges in getting into that space. And she still also had to navigate barriers of stereotypes of what it means to be a woman in a leadership position. So when we talk about this notion of equity, inclusion, diversity, it also speaks to access. And in that, and one of the things I want to promote and push in this presentation today is incorporating this notion of a sense of belonging in leadership. A sense of belonging is a part of that notion or that word of inclusion, where an individual or group sense of belonging is valued or is as a valued member of campus life. And so bringing forth some of the work of Terrell Strayhorn, I'm going to unpack these just real quickly for you. So bear with me. So there's 7 elements to a sense of belonging. And I'll go through each and every one of these with you about what does it mean to really truly foster this sense of belonging. Again, when we're thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, again, and access to these sense of spaces. So the first one is a sense of belonging is a basic human need. And so it's this notion that and in order to belong, there's this knowledge and understanding of self-actualization. We've got to feel that we are valued. But as women, we often know we are othered. And so a society really sort of pushes forth these stereotypes about who we are, how we act, what our behavior should be. And so it's up to us in those organizations to begin to dismantle the stereotypes, the myths, and either preconceived notions about girls and women in these spaces and places so they can be their full selves. The second is a sense of belonging is a fundamental motive sufficient to drive human behavior. And so in that sense, what we're looking at is an opportunity to really influence positive and negative behavior. So if we promote positive interaction, we're going to get positive interaction. So providing support services through the development of our young women is really going to be a key sense to that, and encouraging them again to be their best self. How we approach them, how we interact with our young women also influences how they interact with others. The next is a sense of belonging takes a heightened importance. And so what does that mean exactly? Well, what Strayhorn is really getting at is that the way a student feels, the way a young person feels can vary and change depending on the context, the time, and the dynamics of the particular situation. So depending on the club that they're in, the university that they're in, the age they are, perhaps the geographic location that they're in, we're gonna find that they're gonna face different challenges. And so we have to, again, be mindful of that at different developmental stages in their life. A sense of belonging is related to and seemingly a consequence of mattering. You know, this one really kind of speaks so much to me because the opportunity to feel like you're valued is of great importance. To feel respected for who you are and what you do, and to be accepted is also very important. And so when we talk about this notion of female athletes and sometimes only feel that they matter in their athletic status, right? Or in certain situations. So we need to affirm them not only in their athletic selves, right? But also in identities beyond that, to let them know, yes, you can be a leader, you can be a coach, you can be a mentor, you can be a businesswoman, and to affirm them in these other aspects of who they are. And you can do that within these sporting contexts. This next area, sense of belonging affects, and I put college students in the intersection with social identity, but we can really speak to all young people, K-20, P-20, if you will, on into our professional selves. And really, again, valuing, respecting these identities, not only on the court, but off the court. Oftentimes, young girls, we may feel that we only matter, again, in these spaces. And when we step off, and I talk about college students in particular if you're a woman or woman of color in some of these particular universities, you may be in small towns that are very homogeneous and do not have racial outlets. And so we also have to understand and find support services, create safe spaces for young women to come into their fullness and their identity, because we're going to oftentimes step off campus and be, oh my gosh, really experience some negativity sometimes if we aren't on the court. Many times, again, and we see this with male athletes as well, celebrated for playing, but when you're in these other spaces and places, you could feel some discomfort, even to the point of being in the classroom. You know, you're only here because you're an athlete. So we need to identify, recognize, and celebrate them for not only their athleticism, but their race, their sexuality, their ethnicity, and their respective cultures. A sense of belonging engenders other positive outcomes. It's one of these things, again, creating and fostering this holistic development in these spaces and places. Students feel valued, let them feel cared for, supportive, like they would in any other space or place. So develop ways to not only acknowledge them, but recognize them, providing awards, appointing them to leadership roles, and continuing to develop them as team captains, being on councils, So we're nurturing their development in this space through the venue of sport. And last and certainly not least, this notion of that a sense of belonging must be satisfied on a continual basis, and likely change as circumstances, conditions, and context change. This is not a one-off thing. This is not where we're going to have one meeting, we're going to have one honor, thank you. You know, we do have National Girls and Women in Sports Day. We're going to celebrate you on that day only, but not recognize you any other time of the year. This needs to be an ongoing process. So it may be developing programs, developing services, mentorship programs, leadership programs, where you continue to engage with young girls and help them understand and recognize that you have value beyond your athleticism, and you can actually take those particular skill sets learned in that sport context and transition them to anything that you do. And so that's one of the things that, you know, I'm really appreciative of during my time. I was a student athlete at the University of Houston, had the opportunity to serve as team captain, served on the Student Athletic Advisory Board. I was a peer mentor. And then from there, you know, just different leadership roles have populated. And I've been nurtured by some great environments and some great mentors. And so those are things that I think we must really keep in mind. So when we talk about inclusive excellence, or is excellence inclusive, one of the things that I want us to remember in this space is that the experiential realities are diverse for women. And so is their journey to leadership. The journey can be enhanced through inclusive excellence, again, rooted in this sense of belonging, programs, services, acknowledgement, and allowing them to be their full selves in these spaces. And then ultimately, we need to sort of reimagine what sport organizations can be like, as we will do with our own conference in a couple of weeks at the Institute. But reimagine our organizations, review what our practices and policies are as it relates to our commitment, and begin to overcome or make changes in our diversity and inclusion policies, our practices, and our culture. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's awesome. I'm like, wish I could go back to school now. Places like San Jose and Tucker Center in University of Minnesota, and the studies that Richard Lapchick is doing, to me, I would have been in heaven if I could have done that right after college. You know, I was an American Studies major and got to do sport and society, but there was no formal study of it. It was still a very new field when I came out of college, which will kind of date me a little bit. So to have the stats to back up the stuff that we see day in and day out working in sports is wonderful. And these organizations are absolutely tremendous doing that. So I guess, where does the Sports Bra Project fit into this? I think you're all kind of wondering a little bit. So we're now talking about bras, which it looks like we've got a room full of women. So hopefully we don't have to go over and make you comfortable with it. Hopefully we're already comfortable on that. So a little bit of background that'll hopefully give you an idea as to why these two things kind of pair together. I'm a Title IX baby. I played 3 sports through high school and college, and I spent the first half of my career coaching NCAA schools, oftentimes being the only woman in the room or one of a few women in the room. I worked at a Division II school that's now Division I. We had 23 sports at the time, and we had 2 female coaches, and both of us were assistants. So this isn't that long ago. And those experiences, you know, definitely shaped how I perceive things, and always being the othered in the room and bringing up the women's issues. So through that experience as a college coach, and then in the last 10, 15 years, pretty much on the youth game, like most of us, sports lets us travel, and we get to work with different people and experience different environments and see things from a different perspective, which to me is amazing, absolutely incredible. And I'm very grateful to have friends from around the world, all of whom we don't agree on everything, and we come at things with a very different perspective. And to me, that's fascinating. But what I'm going to put up now is the slides from a couple slides here that'll kind of give you an idea of how that, in fact, if I can figure out how to share, just you think I've been on Zoom long enough, I'm going to share my screen. There we go. All right. Is that sharing? 1%. Okay. So basically, the Sports Bra Project is was born from seeing the barriers that women still face, and seeing that, you know, it may look different in the in one part of the world It may look different in Uganda than it does in New York City, than it does on a reservation in Montana, than it does in Mexico. But the barriers that girls still face really fall in line along three areas: economic, cultural, and logistical. And cultural, I think we all still deal with, how do you define a female athlete? I mean, she's still a female athlete first, with female always qualifying. The WNBA, the NWSL, the NWHL, there's always that qualifier in. So we still have cultural barriers. And as I said, they look different depending on where you are. The three girls on the slide here under Footsat are in Mexico. The three women are part of a women's soccer league in Kenya. And the women in the middle are from Afghanistan, in an area that they could not show their faces because it's not safe to do so. So this was the photo that they felt comfortable with. So we're dealing with barriers culturally. As I said, they look different, but they manifest in the same way that girls are prevented from playing sports. Well, we know the pathways into coaching, and we know the pathways into working within administration or in the sports field in any capacity really start with playing. And if you can't play, you're not going to get girls into these roles. So it's sort of the beginning of it, chicken and the egg a little bit conversation there. The economic piece is one that if it's not a priority culturally and resources are scarce, well, women's sports is not going to be prioritized, and spending money for sports equipment or a sports bra, which is the ultimate piece of sports equipment, is not prioritized. And logistical too. Amazon, believe it or not, does not deliver to every part of the world. There are parts of Africa that you just cannot get Jeff Bezos to deliver to, no matter how much you pay for Prime. So those three things, having traveled and having worked in different environments, you really saw it, and it really hit home. And we could talk on stories of that forever, but we want to be able to open this up to questions at the end. So from that came the Sports Bra Project. And it was really, the Sports Bra is a piece of equipment, and we don't think of it as such. And oftentimes we provide soccer balls, basketballs, volleyballs, but we don't provide the sports bra. And if you're a young girl and your coaches are male, your mom never played, you might not know you need a sports bra or that it could help. And it's one of those things that is often overlooked. So the question is, why is it overlooked? I think every woman on this call has probably played a sport and has probably owned a sports bra at some point. But why is this not ordered standard with socks, with your shin guards, with your shorts, with your uniform jersey? Well, I think the answer is, as Akilah hit it on before, is that inclusion in leadership. And if a woman is not in the room, if you've got a room of 20 men, you may not talk about sports bras, but if you've got a room of 20 women, I'm pretty sure we're going to add that to the list of what we're going to be ordering. So the Sports Bra Project really is just one of many symptoms, or can be seen as a symptom of what comes from not having leadership that represents the demographic that they're serving. So if women are playing, and we know in the United States, we're very lucky, the number of opportunities for girls to play is unbelievable now, and it just keeps growing. But they don't progress out of that too often, as you saw in the coaching numbers. And as I can attest after years in it, I've been the only woman in the room way too many times, more than I can count. I can count the number of times I've been in a room with mainly women, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This never happens. But the Sports Bra Project really was born from, is really one of many symptoms of not having that representative leadership. And that's something that, the sports bra is one thing, but it crosses into gender, the many intersections of gender and race, gender and religion, gender and all these other pieces of it. I can't represent everybody. No woman can, but the importance of having people that look like the demographic that you're working with in the room is important. And this is really, when leadership doesn't include populations being marketed to or served, things pertaining to that underrepresented group risk being overlooked or labeled as special interest, or othered is the other way to look at that, othered and special interest. How many times have we seen a woman's job title include, well, senior woman administrator is one that I could pick on for a while, but I think that's another conversation we can save. But special interest or special topics, like a special topics diploma in coaching for coaching the female athlete. Well, why is that a special topics diploma? Isn't that just coaching an athlete? So the Sports Bra Project, what we do is at the basic level, we provide sports bras to organizations that are working and know the populations they work with. We can give them to an organization on the ground in Kenya whose leadership is from that community and support the activities that they're doing. And we can do the same with a group in New York City. So we don't have to be experts in all those areas, but we can rely on the knowledge and the understanding of the groups and the populations that they're serving. We know the sports bra can be a universal need, but how it's explained or how it's talked about, is it talked about under health? Is it talked about under modesty? You don't want to be seen bouncing around, which was a wake-up call to me when a coach in Namibia mentioned that. She's like, well, it's modesty. I'm like, what do you mean? I just think of it's comfort. I'm an American woman. It's comfort. And she's like, well, if you're bouncing, you're seen as promiscuous. And if you're promiscuous, it's shameful to you and it's shameful to your family. And I'm like, that was, eye-opening to me. So we don't need to be experts in every area that we provide bras to, but we're able to rely on the leadership and that is inclusive in those areas and learn from them. So now we've adjusted things, just like the group in Afghanistan not being photographed from the front. We're learning as we go, but we're relying on people and including people in our programming that, can offer perspectives that we don't have. The sports bras for getting engagement and talking about leadership and developing young female leaders, 90% of our sports bras come from teams that have run sports bra drives and sports bra collections. So a young girls U13 team that wants to do a sports bra drive where they each just donate one bra. Well, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but those 20 bras allow another team to play. And now you have some young girls who've started taking a leadership role and started taking ownership of a project and sort of been able to make the decisions themselves. We've had college teams that have done sports bra drives. Some are larger, some are not very large, but it's something that you can turn over to a captain's group or to a leadership group or your SAC committee. There's a school in Minnesota that their entire SAC committee got involved. So you had football players that were collecting sports bras, and some of them were very happy to pose holding onto the sports bras, but it was a really neat way to start that conversation and normalize women's involvement in sports at a different level. And that's really, as I said, our basic thing is providing and meeting an equipment need that's unmet. But at the bigger side is, can we further this conversation? Why are we still having the conversation? And can we push that forward to normalizing women in all roles of sport? So I think at this point, we can open this up to questions. There's just a little bit of fun at the end, I guess. In the last couple of years, we've done 4,000 sports bras, 26 different countries. We've given to 30 plus organizations, and the number of teams that have contributed, I honestly have lost count of, which has been really cool. This is a volleyball program on the left corner in Puerto Rico. This is a soccer program in Mexico, the 3 girls in the upper picture on the right. This is a swim team in North Dakota that did this as a community service project. Their coach is amazing. She's super active, and they do like community service project one right after the other, but the players take ownership of it. So they collected a bunch of sports bras. And the little bit at the bottom is the tag. We have small tags that we attach, and that connection from the athlete to the other athlete is also something that we value. So they write on the back, good luck, we support what you're doing. So you aren't the only woman. You might be the only woman in your town or community playing or running, but you know that the sports bra you got came from some other women who are supporting you. And that network is absolutely amazing. And social media and the digital programming that we have access to now has allowed us to kind of tap into that and grow. So hopefully that explains sort of a little bit of how a connection between inclusivity and leadership and sports bras relate. I think we're both open to questions, or we can, from anyone who's here. I will unshare my screen.
Okay.
These are just different ways to get involved. There we go. All right. Now we're out of that.
So I'm seeing the question here that we have. First of all, thank you everyone for being here.
Yes.
So appreciated. And I think, like I said, I think we're all women in the room today, which is pretty awesome. So the question was, speak a little bit to our experiences as women playing sport and continuing to work in or with sport. How has identifying as a woman shaped your outlook on sport and working in the industry? My gosh. Well, my experiences, I will say I started competing in track and field at the age of 5. I grew up in Topeka, Kansas, and I had an older brother that competed as well. And I was running around, and my mom's like, she needs to be put in something while he's at this meet. So let's just throw her in and see what happens. Um, it was partly that because I was busy. The other part is I'm asthmatic. And so it was one of the things from a health perspective that they said, hey, she needs to get involved in something to learn how to control her breathing, to make sure, and kind of work through those different asthma attacks that I would have, and that have sidelined me in many times during my life. But I ran track and field. I played volleyball. I was in martial arts. I danced as well. Very retired from that. But I think through each of those experiences, for me, it was social development the whole time. I took to track. I ended up competing in college, but I think I took to track because of the camaraderie, because of the space that my coach created as a youth athlete. He's passed now. His name is Gerald Christensen. I was a member of Thunderbolt Track Club in Topeka, Kansas. But he was a physical educator and an educator by training. And I think that meant so much to me to be in that space, because he understood the importance of just development for all. It didn't matter if you were male or female, but if you weren't going to be at practice, if you were going to be running late, you had to call. You had to show accountability at a young age. And so I was learning all these skills growing up, and I think I just took them with me to everywhere I went, to know that, in order to be a good participant, a good team member, I had to also exhibit these qualities, of kindness, of, friendship, but at the same time, just sort of the wherewithal and enduring sport. I later played volleyball, the high school level, had a great time, on a women's team, which was new for me because I've always been male, female. So that was just a different dynamic to work with. But overall, I think, how has it shaped me? Sport has just given so much to me. The opportunity, as Sarah said, to travel. I'm just like, that was it for me. Once they told me I could travel, I was sold. So I ran to get to the next meet, to get on a plane, to go somewhere. And I really don't think I realized sort of the significance of what it meant to be a woman in sport, meaning what it meant to be othered, what it meant to be sort of that quote unquote special interest, until I got to college and learned about the media and how they would publicize male events versus female events and competitions. And football team came out, we had to clear the room and make room for them. Or just how we were perceived. Again, this notion of promiscuity as a female track athlete because we wore spandex versus, being a lesbian if you're playing basketball. So those things started to just kind of come to me, and was really quite, interesting. So as I worked my way up into pursuing my doctorate, I began to study women more, because even in that, our stories were missing. Our stories of our lived experiences, our leadership, our contributions to the world of sport were missing. And so that shaped me in just so many ways, of wanting to continue to write on women, wanting to continue to celebrate women. In a couple of weeks, I'll be at, not a couple of weeks, next week, our NAS group, so the North American Society for the Sociology of Sport, will be holding our annual conference. I just came off the presidency of that. I was the first African-American woman to be president of that particular organization, but we'll be holding a workshop on, just working with Black female academics or women of color academics to talk about stereotypes and myths, how to navigate the process, the barriers that we will face, and then working to them so they can, be a leader in their own right. So continue to do that work, continue to mentor, continue to support. And I've got a great team that are with me that are on this call today. So shout outs to Beth and Amy, and great interns that work with me. So shout out to Rocky, Annie, who else is there? Jacqueline as well. So just continue to pay it forward, if you will.
I think that's it's interesting listening to perspectives that are so similar in so many ways, but also adding different pieces and different layers to it, because while we do share lots of being women in sports, I think we share there's a lot of shared experiences. There's also very individual ones, whether that's based on, from wherever your background is, age as well. as I said, I was a Title IX baby. It was you were a tomboy or you were a girl. There was nothing. There was not even female athlete. So coming from that initial perspective of, well, if I wear pink, I can't play sports, but if I want to be an athlete, I'm not a girl. Um, and thankfully that has evolved. I will say, at least in the US, that is something that when boys started wearing pink on the field, I was like, yes, finally we've arrived. I can dust off that pink hoodie that I really, really like because it's super comfortable and I know no one's going to laugh at me. So I think it's evolved over the years. I was in a conversation a couple weeks ago with a group of younger coaches, and the question of, well, if women are able to play, they can do this, and it lowers risks of this, and it lowers risks of that, and all these justifications for women playing. And I was like, yeah, but can't we get to the point of, why do I need to justify that I want to play sports? There are amazing benefits. Don't get me wrong. My life is I'm incredibly grateful for the experiences through sports, but 50 years later, we're still justifying our involvement. And I come back to that 1995 ad, I think, from Nike, "If you let me play." And it was wonderful. And in the 90s, we celebrated it. If you let me play, I'm less likely to drop out of school. If you let me play, I'm less likely to get breast cancer. If you let me play, I'm more likely to leave an abusive environment. They listed dozens of these things. And it was a beautiful ad, absolutely wonderfully done in the 90s. And I like to think that we've gotten a little past that we're no longer justifying our involvement, but I think we still are justifying our involvement at maybe less so at the playing level, but more at the administrative and the leadership role level. We're still saying, well, I played sports, so I should be able to be a leader. We're still justifying it. And I think that's something that we've seen, or that I see, at least in soccer, that we're still having to explain ourselves a little bit more and being othered, being the only one in the room. I've been on coaching courses where I'm the only woman, and the coaching, this was for a youth course, and it was for you're focusing on young players, and the first instructor gets up and basically says, well, sometimes, to this room full of men and me, he's like, well, sometimes I think only women should coach younger kids because they're better with kids. And I'm like, okay, so we haven't quite arrived yet. We may have gotten past some of that justification, but there's still, and I'm like, this is going to be a long week. I'm sitting there kind of looking around to see if any guys are looking over at me going, yeah, that's nuts. So, I think my experiences have evolved. Thankfully, we're past some of that, but I do think we still need to be conscious of it and how we use those amazing experiences of sport to put women in leadership roles on the field. Let people see girls and women taking charge of men's programs. That's a whole topic of conversation. Why isn't that the case? We could talk on this for hours. I don't want to. I think there's a couple other questions on there, but. I think, like Akilah, sports for me has shaped me tremendously, and I'm very grateful for it, but I can't say it's always been easy.
Yeah, I see we have a couple more questions, that speak to that, then continue this notion of sort of leadership. So how can women in sport play a role in the cultural movement surrounding women's rights and representation throughout the world? And I think a second question that's closely aligned to it is, what can men do to help support the growth of women's sports and opportunities in sport business? So you want to take a stab at it first, or?
Sure. They do
Okay.
definitely relate to each other. I think, sports doesn't operate in a bubble. I think Naomi Osaka had an awesome comment. I'm not going to quote it correctly, after she won and people were telling her to basically stay in her lane and just talk tennis. She's like, well, if I worked at IKEA, could I only talk about the Billy bookcase? I'm like, that's absolutely, they're so connected. Yeah. Sport and society, you can see how, and the civil rights movement and women's rights, you can see how they kind of stair step each other, and at times working together and at times working against each other, and kind of, one takes a jump ahead and the other takes a jump ahead. Sport and society, they're so intertwined. I think finally in the 90s, having that recognition that there are now institutions that are studying that, sport and society and sport for social change. You can't separate them. And I think that they have both hurt each other and helped each other in different aspects. This is the first question. How can men help? This is one that I think has gotten, people talk about being allies and all the business, you can read all the business stories about, well, amplify what she's saying, agree with her, all these things. And we've heard all those sort of plans for making it successful and easy for men to be allies. But in reality, I think it's for sometimes harder than we acknowledge. I think
Mhm.
sometimes a guy who might behind the scenes be very supportive and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is going on, is not always as comfortable saying that publicly because there's still that macho aspect of sport. And I think as a woman, we're used to being the only one and the one being told we're wrong. And for some men in that field, it's a little bit harder. So not just backing a woman quietly, but doing it publicly and calling out other
Mhm.
men when that behavior isn't okay, when she's being talked over, when her
Mhm.
ideas are being appropriated by others a little bit louder 10 minutes later, all those things. And then just actually asking, just like including in leadership roles, asking. Sometimes, we're happy to share stories and support and how you can help us. But sometimes they just need to ask.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. For me, I see, again, how can women play a role in the cultural movement? I think about what's your platform? What are you comfortable in doing? Because in many ways, we're more comfortable in one position. I love being behind the scenes, but I've been thrust in different times, to that fore. But I kind of, stay in my wheelhouse and what I do. I really love working with women one to one and doing the mentoring. I continue to write and use my platform as a scholar to educate, and to write research to kind of uplift and hold workshops in those respects. I oftentimes share out when I do speak this wheel, as I guess I call it, this of social justice wheel, or social change wheel that came from the Anti-Defamation League that talks about educating others, advocating for legislation, running for office, demonstrate and protest, create public awareness and social media campaigns, research, as I said, raise money and resources to your project, right? Write a company or public official, engage in community service, and just get involved in any other way. So, those are some of the things that I really encourage my young women to do is, what do you feel comfortable doing? What is your current platform? You may be a social media guru, run it, do it. But we're known even as women as organizers. So, and doing all those things. But if that's what you're comfortable doing, you can do that in any way. And also understand too, those are, I think, a lot of sort of outward things. A lot of people, and this is something I said on stage last year, and even at the NAS conference, when we talk about this notion of representation matters, and you've just said it as well. You've been the only one in the room. That in itself is activism. That in itself is just making a difference because yes, you're in that space and you're N of one, but that N of one counts because your role and your efforts in that space are most likely going to usher in another woman. So that one becomes two, and that two becomes three, and you're creating a pipeline in many ways. I think as far as men helping, I kind of throw it out there. I'm like, did you have a mother? Do you have a sister? I mean, some of them are just kind of basic. I think when, I got married and we had a daughter, and my husband had to just kind of, who's very, male focused, trained men as well, because he was a coach, but he now had a daughter. And it's like, well, what do you do? And you support her, in every way. And my dad was one of those people that did that, taking me to track meets and getting my shoes, and giving me some of the 411, about how to sort of operate in different rooms and spaces and places. So that in itself, just having a cheerleader, for me was a good thing as well. But then to have someone serve as a sponsor for you, which I've had many mentors that have brought me into the room. Yes, it's there for their meeting, but you know what? Here's somebody else that you need to hear from. So ushering in those types of opportunities. Next steps. I have another question here. What are the next steps in counteracting stereotypes faced by female athletes and starting to respect and celebrate their athletic accomplishments rather than diminishing them because they're just a girl or play like a girl? I'll have you start. The project, I think, exhibits a lot. Well, I mean, I think the project and what you're doing, and what you shared, provides a lot of insight in the sense of, it's not just a US thing. Where it's a global effect, and my colleagues and I right now, we are a part of a group called IWG, so International Working Group,
Mhm.
working with women from across the world in many different areas. I'm focusing on social change in our group to really unpack some of the barriers and challenges
Yeah.
for women in these spaces and places, and to really work to do that, counteract these stereotypes,
Mhm.
and dismantle some of the behavior and policies that may be written as tradition. We've done this, and start dismantling a lot of that, so we can begin to have and create spaces for more women to assume those roles in leadership, to have access to sport, to participate and play, but also women themselves, teaching young girls how to um, push back
Mhm.
against a lot of the stereotypes. So instead of being, we're often deemed as, especially Black women, you're angry or you're aggressive. As opposed to
Mhm.
just being assertive, like the male was. I'm like, I'm just telling you, this is the way to do it. It's all in those types of things, having to constantly, as you said, justify
Mhm.
being in that space.
I think countering the stereotypes, the more women that are involved and the more women who are different from each other that are involved helps with that. As I
Hmm.
said, when I was younger, the choice was you were a tomboy, so not really a girl, or you were a girl. And there really wasn't anything in between. So there started to be stereotypes. And they started to kind of hold true a little bit. Well, if I want to be taken seriously as an athlete, that means I'm going to wear more masculine clothes. I'm going to cut my hair. I'm not going to date as much. So suddenly these
Hmm.
stereotypes start self-fulfilling prophecies. So I think the more women
Hmm.
we have involved from all different areas and all different, backgrounds and interests, the more it normalizes that and the quicker those stereotypes break down.
Hmm.
It's you don't have to be a particular thing. We don't ask any man in sports to be exactly like every other man in sports. Why do we ask every woman? Well, if you're a woman in sports, you're this way. So I think having multiple women from various backgrounds and taking on various roles really is something that's going to start to break that down, because they see that, she's qualified, and they start to look at her as a person and as someone with experience and someone with qualifications first, not just, oh, well, she's a woman, she's got to be this way. But that only happens if there's a broad range of women involved, just like there's a range of men involved.
Right.
So I think that's looks like we have another question coming in on the before we go on, one quick thing on the what you can do, because sometimes it seems like not everyone's comfortable with taking on a big public topic. Little stuff that you can do. For me, if I'm on a field and I know that the little sister of a boy I'm coaching is showing up, I make sure I ask her what she's playing, and sometimes it's soccer and she answers correctly. Other times she comes up with another sport, but it's always like I celebrate that. I'm like, oh, you play basketball, that's awesome. It's just having those little interactions, and having the brothers see that their sisters can play, and the sisters see that a woman can take the lead running their brother's practice, that this isn't just the domain of men. And
Right.
it's not a large thing. You're not having to scream anything. It's just those small interactions that hopefully by the time that young girl gets to be 14 or 15, she's now a little bit more assertive. She realizes, oh, I could coach, or, oh, I could run this program. And
Right.
that's, I'll never know that, but that little bit helps.
Well, and on the flip of that, I do some of the things in with my son.
Mhm.
I've taken him to WNBA games, and he was like, "I didn't know girls played basketball." I'm like, "Yes." So just exposing him, and we watch, the WNBA. He sees women play soccer. He and I were jogging one day, and he was like, "Well, let's race." And so I did, and he was like, "Mommy, it's fast." And so it just came as a shock to him, that his mom would be fast. But just having those engagements as well to again counter some of the interactions he may be having in his school,
Mhm.
or where he sees more men play, or his influence by that begins to break some of that down as well.
Mhm.
What is the recent surge in implementing
Mhm.
DEI committees and officers in organizations and governing bodies? Is tangible change actually happening because of those initiatives? And if not, what needs to shift to actually see more inclusivity?
Yeah, I'd say it depends on the organization that you're in. If they're
Mhm.
really committed to it and they have a strategy as well as are open to conversations and moving things forward, then you can get amazing things happening. Other times, I think it's just throwing it out there because we now need to have it. Like as we said, the senior woman administrative title, it's now required. So here
Mhm.
we are. We're going to put it out there. And I think those are almost worse, and those can hurt a little bit more if it's a program that's not truly supported. Because yeah, we've got this program, and this is the time that we're talking about diversity. This is the time that we're talking about women. This is the time that we're talking about this or that. It's that it becomes a special topic. But if it's
Yeah.
truly integrated in, I think it's something that's valuable. I can't think of any
Yeah.
specific examples right now, but I'm sure you might have a few of them.
Well,
With
I think I'm in agreement as well. Again, kind of going back to two things. One, to the work of Richard Lapchick and seeing how he sort of goes in and breaks down those respective organizations from the NCAA to the NBA to the WNBA to Major League Soccer to even the Associated Press that write the stories and the media, the media images of what are those representative people, what do the demographics look like, who's telling the stories, who's leading. And so part of it is being able to go in and really illuminate the statistics,
Mhm.
the statistical representation of who's there. That's one step. And then the other is, I think, going back to what I was speaking on today, this notion of inclusive excellence. It has to be something that's written into the mission statement of that organization, that this is something that really truly matters and that we speak to. So in our mission, in our vision, in our goals, in our programming, in our interactions with people, in our representation in our organization, we're seeing it at every level. I think the WNBA is one of those organizations that is exhibiting a lot of that. And so it's looking to those organizations that are doing that, but it's going to be a push to really force organizations to shift their culture and the cultural dynamics that they have in their respective spaces and places. How do they do business, and taking a hard look at that. And I think this is a critical time to do that.
The last piece of it, of that question, I think had at the youth level, does it trickle down or move up to the professional level or both? I think it's got to be a combination. I actually
Mhm.
see fewer female coaches at the youth level than I do at the
Mhm.
college level, and it's less studied. It's harder to manage because there's multiple registrations across different governing bodies, so you can't get the hard fast numbers as easily, especially in club sports that are outside of a school system. So I think it has to be a little bit of both. You need people working from the younger
Yeah.
levels so that you have why is parent coaching the domain of men, when you've got women who've played more in a particular sport than their husbands may have, or than the men or the fathers may have. But you think you need that push from that younger side so the kids can experience male and female role models at a younger age and a range of role models at a younger age. And then at the higher levels that tend to the governance structure, everybody says, oh, the NCAA is the top. Well, great. If you're looking at that as a model, well, the NCAA needs to model it a little bit better at some levels.
Mhm.
So I think you need both. It's not mutually exclusive. And little things can have an impact, but sometimes structural things. And then you can add the question of quotas, which I think we could debate for a very long time, the good and bad of that. And, on many aspects, and a little slippery slope on some of that, but I don't think there's a one size fits all answer. I think it needs to be tackled from many different fronts.
Mhm.
That may be, I don't know, what have you seen on that one? I'd be curious your thoughts.
I mean, I've worked at the high school level for a whopping 9 months, which was quite interesting. I was in Rockford, Illinois, and that was just a interesting dynamic in and of its whole. So I haven't really operated at that level so much. I've been more in the college spaces and places where I think we still have, as you suggested, and as the statistics show, we still have challenges within the NCAA governance, whether it be D1, D2, or D3, of having positions and hiring women at those levels, and to be able to serve as coaches of women's teams, which is
Mhm.
quite interesting. And even in your combination teams, I've seen both men and women have full representation by all male staff. And
Mhm.
and to me, I'm still curious as to, that rationale. I'm like, you have women on your team, like who are they going to for support? And that was one of the things while my husband was coaching at the collegiate level, that he and I sort of worked together in that, because I created a group called, with my really good colleague, Denise Dorich, called Sister to Sister, that really worked to support those female athletes at that level, because there was no female representation. Because I'm like, who do you go to talk to about a sports brawl, or just an issue or a challenge that you may have that is more gleaned towards their lived experiences as a woman. And so, being in the stands, I would go to those meets, but at the same time I was working at the university as well. So, my husband was great. He was like, just go see my wife, you know and talk to her. But it was a very supportive relationship in that, and that, they knew that someone would be there. But again, I just want, um, those organizations to consider what value, is had beyond hiring that representation, but to those young athletes being able to interact and have dialogue with a woman, in those spaces and places.
I would say the same for male athletes too. Having a coach with the junior college men's program, and that dynamic is very interesting. And working to coach with coaching boys, not because I think that that's a higher level to coach, but because I think it's the more men can see women in that different role, the different relationship they're going to have with women, and the different relationship they're going to have perceiving women's sports. It does take a little bit to win them over initially, but once they do, you start to realize they have a different dynamic with you, but they're now seeing a woman in a different role. So does that change how they perceive their sister, their mom, their wife,
Yeah.
the interactions they expect with another coworker who's female, because we still have very gendered working environments at times. And I think that that's having women in those roles is not just for the women that are participating in the sport, but for the men as well. And that's sort of a
Yeah.
bigger societal push too.
And I think, that's a great way to even kind of talk about that, and address the last question. If a woman doesn't know how to get involved, and what's the best advice for her to spearhead the effort to become more involved in sport, coaching, administration? Again, look for those national bodies. I'm going to throw out again, the Women's Sports Foundation, the Black Women in Sports Foundation, the International Working Group, the Tucker Center for Girls and Women in Sport. I will speak to I think they have Women's Coaching Association.
Yep.
And of course, National Girls and Women in Sports Day is one of those events that sort of corrals, and you are able to sort of see some of the events that are happening in your area that speak to supporting girls and women in sport. So look for those organizations, look for those associations to support you. If you're an academic, look in those different academic hubs, and find those spaces and places where you can plug in, meet those scholars, meet those administrators, meet those coaches. In many ways, it's just being in the room, being in the space. But network. But again, find those organizations. And if got questions, of course, reach out to us, and we'll get you connected.
Absolutely. The one other piece I would add to those would be social media is amazing. And yes, it's a rabbit hole and awful at times, but the only reason the Sports Bra Project works is because this network of women that are all in the only woman in their room are now able to connect over social media. So if there's someone who you like what they're doing, see who they're following, see what organizations they're following and involved in, and start to build your network that way. It'll give you a bigger picture of what's going on out there, but it's also, people are really open to messages most of the time. And some of the best connections we've had for the Sports Bra Project have come from people who've just reached out, or I've reached out to, saying, I think this might be a good conversation. Can we just chat? And social media has provided a platform that we didn't have 20 years ago. And as I said, it can be a rabbit hole, especially with politics currently, but there are some really good stuff in it if you're willing to look through it and kind of, look at it critically. So take the stuff that you like and analyze who you're following, and kind of look at that a little bit.
So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Feel free to reach out and connect with us via social media, LinkedIn, email, what have you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.